Hi, this is Camila from the Bliss Institute, and I'm going to be doing a review of the movie Annihilation, based on the book Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer. So the first comments about this is that the book and the movie are very different. They are supposed to be presented differently. I have heard it said that the director has seen it as the movie is like a dream of the things that occurred in the book. I was honestly a little sad that there were some changes from the book to the movie because a lot of the plot points that I really liked in the book were not included in the movie. There were other issues that it covered and that it focused on, but I really enjoyed some of the different aspects that were excluded from the movie. The main character is Lena, who is a biologist, and she was in the army for 7 years, where she met her husband, who is known as Kane, and they live in this kind of very idyllic lifestyle and in their home, and they're rarely seen outside of the bedroom where they have most of their interactions, and so their relationship is presented to us in these snippets, in these frames of these very circumstantial discussions between them about God and about the relationship to each other and to the world around them, and the overall purpose of what life is, and why things happen the way that they do. And so we find Lena where, and this is a basic premise, so no spoilers, hopefully, yet. We find Lena where her husband has been gone and he reappears, and she's trying to figure out what's going on and why. And so then she takes this adventure into this space that's known as Area X, where this phenomenon has occurred where they're trying to figure out what's going on, and they're sending in different parties and groups to go and try to find out what's happening. And in this circumstance in which she goes in, she is with a group of all women, and they are trying to just find out what's happening. They're trying to gather samples and to explore and to reach the point in which they believe that this phenomenon began to occur, and that these different things, these different changes that are happening in this environment originated from. I would say overall, the movie is visually stunning. If you go for no other reason, go to see just the way that they use light and color and sound and kind of delve and meld all these different things together, which is, I'm sure, supposed to be a reference to one of the plot points in the movie about change and what does it mean to change and what happens when we change, and how we adapt to change and transformation. Do we fight it? Do we welcome it? Do we decide to do we break from it? Do we have a psychological break because of it? Do we are we annihilated because of it? So these different ways that all these different characters interact with this transformation that they are experiencing, and how we as a being, as humanity, change over time, and how we transform, and the different ways then that this on a larger scale, on a macro scale in society, how different groups interact and how different groups assimilate and adjust, and what they do in order to be able to survive. Like what length will you go to in order to be able to survive at the end of the day? So it's a really great analysis and taking a look at that. That is, of course, if you really want to delve in that deeply, if you want to kind of stay more surface level, then it's a fun movie that's taking a look at alien life and, what's going on, and supernatural, and are we in control of things? Is God playing, a role in our lives, and the different ways that we explain the world around us. So there's a lot of different interpretations in which I'm sure that people will want to take with this movie. The end is outstanding. Well, I would say probably the 10 minutes before the actual end of the movie. It's just absolutely beautiful, and you're sitting there trying to really follow along and see what's happening and who is doing what and what does this mean, and how does this apply to this overall longer journey and narrative that is Lena's, that is about confronting who she is and what she stands for and why she does what she does, and her relationship to her husband is really portrayed in this beautiful way at the very end. And it reminds me a bit, I'll say this of the story of the phoenix who rises from the ashes, and how sometimes change requires for us to destroy everything that is present around us in order for us to be able to grow and to be something different. And as we like to say sometimes, burn it down. You have to burn it down. And in some cases, that is the only way in which to free yourself from the confines of the space in which you originally find yourself in order to be able to grow and become something new. So I'm going to say that that's going to be my spoiler-free review. Beautiful. It's will challenge you if you want to have that type of experience, and if you just want to maybe see something that's fun and kind of interesting, I would definitely say it is that. There were some points that were a little slow, particularly towards the middle. There are some decisions that are made that you're kind of like, I don't understand, and they give explanation for it, meaning for why certain people do what they do, why people keep moving forward even when it's like, this doesn't make any sense to keep going forward. We should try to, go and put ourselves back together or regroup. So they give some explanation to that. I feel that the book had a stronger explanation, but the overall storyline is different in the book. In the movie, I felt like the explanation was a little bit more cliche, a little weaker, just because it was more of this obvious kind of ploy on like different issues and psychological things that affect us depending on where we are in our lives and the type of situations that we're experiencing. I did enjoy that there were some different ways of looking at how women were portrayed, and although it was kind of there were some instances where it was like, oh, it's gonna be a team of women. Oh, all the teams before were men. Okay, well now we're sending in a group of women. It was soldiers who were men, and now we're sending in a team of scientists who are women. And it's like, okay, well, that's nice. Even though it really didn't, it didn't really help them at all. From what I saw, really, it seemed like it didn't improve upon their chances or what was happening, or their understanding of what all was going on because they sent in this group. I feel like the explanation from the book is a better explanation of why they sent in a group of women, which I'll cover in the spoiler edition of this. I'll just leave it as that now. But yeah, some of their decisions didn't make a lot of sense. It was plausible because of the explanation that was eventually given, but initially you're just kind of like, why? And there is this repetitious question of, I don't know. Everyone's answer is, I don't know, which, of course, we want to understand. We want to know why, but there's just not a lot of exploration or other explanation that goes with it. And I'm sure that that's a part. It had a purpose, but eventually, you get the same answer 20 different times, and it's just like, okay, give us something, because in knowing how the story goes, there is a reason, there is an understanding of why, there is an actual answer that goes to all of these questions, and yet we're not exploring any of those even remotely. But I suppose that's behind the different storyline that is the purpose of this movie. But overall, I did enjoy it. I would say go and expect to spend some time and have some fun and enjoy yourselves. Let me know what you thought of the movie below. Thanks. Bye. Hi, it's Camila from the Bliss Institute, and I am finishing up my last video about Annihilation, and we're going to be talking about the book version this time in comparison with the movie. So first off, if you've seen, I have 2 videos already made for the Annihilation, the movie, the non-spoiler and the spoiler. The spoiler review is super long, and it goes into every detail, and it gives all kind of the snarky and non-snarky feedback. But in this, I just want to talk about some of the elements from the book. First of all, completely different, which is fine. I totally understand that, but completely different. And some of the elements I feel that if you hadn't read the book, the movie might not have made as much sense. So in the book, it starts off, we're there, we're in it. And then the biologist as the unreliable narrator, because I mean we know that the girl is going through some changes. It tells us, they don't use names there, unlike in the movie. In the movie, everyone has names. You're hearing about people's backstories. You're knowing about them. Everyone is very de-identified. It's literally kind of like a case study. Like, there's no names, and you don't know any of the background about the participants in the study. And she doesn't talk a lot about the linguist in the book, and she doesn't talk a lot about I can't even remember what her character is, because she was like, none of these people make it. The linguist decides not to come. There were supposed to be 5. There's 5 in the actual movie who make it out there, but the linguist decides not to come because she has a psychological breakdown beforehand, and I believe it's because and I don't quite remember. I know there's more explanation in the second and the third book, but I can't quite remember what all goes on with the linguist and why she decides not to come, which, I mean, it was important. Her role would have been important for the book. But she's like, nah, this isn't going to work. I'm not going out there, which was probably the wisest decision out of any of the decisions that these people have made. But the biologist is like, I don't really feel like I need to talk about too many of these people because they don't make it very far. And that's in like the first few pages of the book. She's like, these 2 people die, so they're not really all that important. There's other more important people to talk about. So we get a little bit of the backstory kind of thrown in there. Things are a bit more haphazardly told in the book. It's not, it might not be perhaps the easiest to follow, but we learned that they went through training to actually go into Area X, and this training included a lot of psychological prepping because they were well aware. So from what they knew, they were the 13th, I believe they were, or they might have been the 12th. They might have been the 12th party to go in. I think they were the 12th, which is interesting if you get into like esoteric and things, and like the 12th and, number 3 and all that fun stuff. But anyways, so I believe they were the 12th team to go in. They might have been 13. And so they tried all these kind of different formats, and the team that went in before them was all male. So they were like, all right, well, we're going to give this a shot and try all females. We're going to see if a group of women going in is, what they can find out in comparison to what the others found out. And so the biologist, again, this lined up. The biologist's husband was on that team prior to going in. But in the movie, he was the only one who returned. In the book, there were a couple, I believe there were 3 people who actually came back from that 11th expedition out into Area X. Area X was more well known. This was not some kind of, not as much of a government cover-up. She did know where her husband had gone. She knew why he went. They had more information about what's going on in Area X and in the Southern Reach. So there was just a little bit more awareness of what was happening. So the husband, so I was saying, they got training with the weapons. There were no electronics allowed to go in. We'll find out later that they had tried that before, but there were none allowed to go in. They were giving kind of like a indicator that would blink red if something, like there were dangerous levels or something going on, and then they were given a notepad to take notes in and to make their field notes and things like that, and journal and take notes so that they could report back, even though nobody ever comes back, but here's your journal, let us know how it goes. In the book, another significant difference is that between the book and the movie is that there is a very clear entry point where the wall is, where you can enter into this Area X. And in the book, it's kind of presented in this more abstract way where it's like, okay, well, you have to get the training to actually go and enter, and the psychologist has to hypnotize you. The hypnotism and the psychologist are super important in the book, and that element is kind of missing in the movie, but kind of also there in subtle ways, which you're like, okay, I wonder if this is a part of that they're kind of giving a little nod to for the book. But you have to get hypnotized, and so You do not remember how you go in. You do not remember where you actually cross into Area X, and you do not recall kind of like how to get out. There's no clear instructions on how to actually get out. It's, you're supposed to let the psychologist hypnotize you, and then, you'll arrive there and you'll arrive back out on the other side. So they get in and there's more explanation. People know where they're going. There's maps, there's feedback, there's ideas about, okay, the lighthouse is here, and there's the camp set up here, and there's the beach here, and all these other things. They have maps and such. And just more information is in the book. And so the larger story of people kind of losing their minds, not adjusting well to the changes that are happening here, the amount of information that's given out. So the psychologist in the book has more information that you come to find out. They get to, it's not the lighthouse, they get to what the biologist calls the tower, what everyone else calls the tunnel, but it's this kind of underground pathway that leads them down, and within this space you're finding words, which is why the linguist is important in the book and doesn't matter in the movie, because there's these phrases which I cannot remember off the top of my head, but there's these really important phrases. It's really, it delves really deeply into this conversation of who are we and what is our purpose and what's going on here, and how do we express ourselves. And again, it goes back to that, how do you deal with change and transformation, but just in a different way. It's presented in a different way. And it would make sense for a book that is a text to use words as a way of really signifying this. So they have to interpret kind of what's going on there and find a way to kind of understand what's happening. And people do not make it, just as they do not in the book. For different reasons, though, eventually they... I cannot remember. The surveyor in the book who begins to suspect that, things are not what they appear to be. The psychologist probably knows more than what they're letting on to. They go down into the hole. They have an encounter, and that's when the biologist is reading the symbols and looking at the moss that there's a scene that's very similar to this in the movie, and she gets kind of close up to the moss, and I'm like, no girl, no, because we know what happens, but it doesn't spray it in the movie. It's just in the air. It's airborne, and that's how you can interact with it and become contaminated. And there's a little bit more of the laboratory aspects, actually testing of the cells and testing of the samples. And so they go down and they interact, and they're realizing that they come in contact. They've been contaminated, and do we try to confine it and maintain it with just us, or are we willing to move on and continue to explore? And so those are kind of some of the bigger differences. One of the major differences, and this is a huge spoiler, huge spoiler. And I'm going to go ahead and write on the title of this. This is a spoiler book review, because the whole purpose of Annihilation is that we find that the interaction with this species, this thing that's changing people's physical, biological makeup, allows for them to be not susceptible to the hypnosis that they learned from the psychologist. So we know that they knew they were getting hypnotized, but they did not know all the ways that they were being hypnotized and all the different triggers that they had set in them. And so the psychologist uses some of the triggers. So in the movies, there's points where the psychologist is saying something, you're like, girl, no, wait, why is nobody saying anything? Well, if we use that premise of that they have been hypnotized and that there are words and phrases that you can use to trigger them to not put up a lot of resistance, to just do what you say, to go back to the camp, to not question what's going on, then her being able to just be like, no, let's keep going, makes way more sense than kind of, I guess the fear of we don't want to try to question what's happening here in the movie. And it goes back to that larger question of annihilation, because annihilation was actually one of their trigger words. It was one of their words to trigger a certain response from the people who heard it. But because the biologists have been changed, she was no longer susceptible to it. But it gets into a lot more of how do we as hosts react to when things begin to invade and to change us and to take over, because if it's a hostile environment, you know, more than likely a virus or something of that nature, or something that is going to transform us, is not going to want to really, it's spending more time recovering and trying to make us a susceptible host than it is in being able to just transform us. And so we find that there's an element of that that's spoken about inside of the text, and the lengths that we are willing to go to be able to survive and to maintain our idea of who we are, and maintain our being, our humanity. Another really interesting element is that and it's covered a bit more in the text than it is in the movie, is the actual change that goes on, and how people did not only just become the plants and all these other things, they become the animals as well. That's not covered as much. We know that there were animals there and that they are mutated and that things become a part of each other, but we don't see, as in this one, where there's a scene between the dolphin and the biologist. And the biologist is like, there's just something about the look in this dolphin's eyes that has this very like humane element to it, and it reminded her of her husband. And we get more pieces later on that the people are becoming a part of the animals in the land, and that they are literally mutating to become one. And so there is kind of this like underlying, like, is this dolphin literally does this dolphin literally have parts of her husband in it? And is that why she was able to recognize just that little piece? And so we see way more of that. We see a lot more explanation. We get more understanding of why the lighthouse, the importance of the lighthouse, the importance of the village, the importance of, in the movie, there are these 4 skeletons, and kind of the importance of that and the role that they play. And there's no really mention. There's one scene in the movie where there is a man that you can kind of see in this light. And in the movie, we hear more about this kind of elusive lighthouse keeper. And so I would definitely recommend reading the book. I've seen some reviews where people say it's a little bit confusing, and I can understand how that's possible. I just find it to be entertaining because I like the content, and I like the discussion of kind of what it's looking into. So I enjoyed it. Particularly this discussion about self-destruction, and how we are kind of, we can find ourselves leaning towards just making these decisions that are really harmful to ourselves, even if we are not necessarily self-harming or suicidal or something of that nature that we label as more self-destructive behaviors, but kind of more of the obtuse things that we do. Not getting enough sleep at night, knowing that you have a really important interview or test the next day, not studying when you have a test the next day, not eating well, taking in extracurricular activities such as smoking and drinking and doing all these other things that we know was not good for our bodies, and yet we do them anyway. Sabotaging relationships, not turning stuff in, not answering phone calls, not returning emails, just little things that we can do that we know will have a negative effect on what comes from it, but we do it anyway because, it's that fear of really diving in and living. Sometimes people really feel like the pain lets them know that they're alive. So it takes an interesting angle of looking at, how, especially with that, the pain lets you know that you're still you and you're still alive. There's definitely a very interesting storyline that plays into the biologist ending tale that explores that concept a little bit. So I say definitely give it a read. Let me know what you think. If I'm rambling a little bit at the end, I'm super tired. But I just wanted to kind of get this all out and share some information and insights of what I thought about it. So I'll see you later. Bye.